This isn't just about sports, pool parties, or summer vacations. It's about safety. It's about survival. According to the CDC, black children between the ages of 10 and 14 drown in swimming pools at a rate 6 times higher than white children. Across the broader population, black Americans under 30 are about 1.5 times more likely to drown than white Americans of the same age. That's not a minor difference. It's a public safety crisis measured in lives. What's even more surprising is that this stereotype doesn't line up with history at all. Long before slavery, many African societies had strong traditions of swimming, fishing, boating, and living alongside rivers and coastlines. Being comfortable in the water wasn't unusual. It was often an essential part of everyday life. So where did the disconnect come from? Slavery changed everything. Water stopped representing recreation or practical skill. It became associated with danger. Rivers became escape routes. Waterways became patrol routes. Drowning became a constant threat. Many enslaved people were intentionally discouraged or outright prevented from learning to swim because that knowledge could make escape more possible. At the same time, water became deeply connected to the trauma of the transatlantic slave trade and the violence of enslavement itself. Now imagine those experiences echoing through generations, not always through direct stories, but through caution, silence, fear, and unspoken habits passed from parents to children. Trauma like that doesn't simply disappear because decades go by. Then came America's public swimming boom. During the late 1800s and early 1900s, cities across the country invested heavily in public pools, but those investments weren't shared equally. As NPR has documented, many of the largest and nicest public pools were built in white working-class neighborhoods, while predominantly black neighborhoods were often overlooked. When black communities did gain access to swimming facilities, they were frequently smaller indoor pools instead of the large outdoor resort-style pools enjoyed by many white families. So even as swimming became part of American culture, black communities were systematically excluded from many of its best opportunities. One of the darkest parts of this history is that public pools were viewed as unusually intimate spaces. People wore bathing suits. Families gathered together. Men and women swam side by side. Racist attitudes made many white Americans especially obsessed with preventing black men from sharing those spaces with white women. According to NPR's reporting, once public pools became mixed gender, efforts to enforce racial segregation around swimming only became more aggressive. This wasn't simply about swimming. It was about racism, power, and deciding who was allowed to fully participate in public life. And that exclusion wasn't always subtle. Sometimes it was brutally public. One of the most infamous examples happened during the 1964 civil rights protests in St. Augustine, Florida, when a motel manager poured acid into a swimming pool while black demonstrators and their white supporters were still in the water. Think about the message moments like that send across generations. The message wasn't, "This is a skill everyone should learn." It wasn't, "You belong here too." The message was that the water itself could become a place of humiliation, violence, or even death. Even after segregation laws began to fall, the damage didn't disappear overnight. NPR reports that when many public pools were finally required to integrate, white attendance often dropped dramatically. Many white families shifted toward private swim clubs and backyard pools, places where they could maintain social separation even after legal segregation ended. At the same time, public pools gradually stopped receiving the same level of investment. Many communities, especially lower-income urban neighborhoods, were left with fewer safe places to swim. Black families were first locked out through segregation, and later left behind through decades of disinvestment. This is where history becomes deeply personal. If your grandparents were denied access to pools, and your parents never learned to swim, there's a good chance no one taught you either. That's how generational fear develops. Parents pass along anxiety about the water because they never felt confident or safe in it themselves. To me, that's one of the most heartbreaking parts of this entire story. A family stays away from the water because they're afraid. That leads to fewer swimming skills. Those missing skills increase the danger, and the fear gets reinforced all over again. The cycle keeps repeating. Take the story of Genesis Holmes, a 13-year-old boy from South Carolina who drowned after entering the water with friends. His mother later explained that he never made it back because he didn't know how to swim. Stories like that put a human face on the statistics. This is what those numbers actually represent, not just percentages on a chart. A child, a grieving family, a future that ended because a basic life-saving skill was never passed down. There's another challenge that often gets overlooked. Learning to swim usually requires access. It helps if your neighborhood has a safe pool. It helps if lessons are affordable. It helps if your family has transportation, enough free time, and adults who already know how to swim well enough to teach you. Research shows that nearly 80% of children growing up in households earning less than $50,000 a year don't have basic swimming skills. Studies also point out that there are far fewer public pools than privately owned residential pools, creating another barrier for families who depend on community facilities. PBS has reported that many neighborhoods still don't have enough safe, affordable places where children can learn to swim. Advocates often make the comparison that public pools are to water safety what public schools are to education, and that comparison makes a lot of sense. If people don't have access to a place where they can safely learn, telling them to just learn to swim ignores the real obstacle. There are cultural factors, too. One issue that's frequently discussed within Black communities is hair care. Maintaining natural hairstyles or protective styles can require significant time and money. Chlorine, salon costs, upkeep, and social expectations all influence whether someone feels comfortable spending time in the water on a regular basis. Compared to slavery or segregation, that might seem like a small issue, but everyday decisions are shaped by everyday realities, and those realities matter. So, what's the real story? The truth is that Black Americans didn't simply forget how to swim. Over generations, American society created conditions that made swimming more difficult to access, more difficult to trust, and more difficult to pass from one generation to the next. Slavery planted fear. Segregation denied opportunity. Violence reinforced the message that certain spaces were off-limits. Then, white flight, privatization, and decades of underinvestment left many communities with even fewer places to learn. Generation after generation inherited the consequences. That's why this isn't just a conversation about history. It's about public health. It's about equal access. It's about whether families have the opportunity to learn a skill that can save lives. The encouraging part is that the story doesn't have to end there. PBS has highlighted organizations that are funding swim lessons for Black children and families with lower income. Programs like the Genesis Project, along with initiatives supported by USA Swimming, are working to make lessons more affordable and accessible while helping communities rebuild confidence in the water. That's important because shame has never been the solution. Access is. Affordable lessons matter. Visible role models matter. Community support matters. This is one of those challenges where meaningful progress is absolutely possible, but only if people stop treating it as a stereotype or a punchline and start recognizing it as the safety issue it has always been. So when someone asks, "Why can't Black people swim?" the real answer is that it's the wrong question. The better question is this: why were so many Black Americans denied the opportunity to learn in the first place? Once you ask that question instead, the entire conversation changes. You're no longer blaming people for a stereotype. You're examining the history that helped create it. And if we're willing to be honest about that history, maybe more families can replace fear with confidence, replace silence with opportunity, and replace a dangerous stereotype with something far more powerful. A future where swimming is simply another life skill that every child has the chance to learn.